tonight's meeting. Tonight we have Diane Doherty, and she is the director of the Family Justice Center that will, in the near future, become your safe place. And we're going to be discussing teen dating violence tonight. Thanks so much for your time, Diane.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here tonight, and good evening, Amy and Anna. Thanks so much for inviting me here tonight. I'm very excited to speak on this topic. It's very near and dear to my heart. And so again, thank you for that nice introduction. My name is Diane Doherty. I am the executive director, and we did officially relaunch our name in October, DV Awareness Month. So we are your safe place, the Family Justice Center. So come check us out. We give tours on Fridays if anybody wants to see us. So as I'm talking, I'm going to just try to share my screen. I will ask for everybody's moment of, right. You can see my turtle. There we go. Now, can you see the slides on the left or the big slide?
The slide, we can see both.
Okay. Oh, you can? There we go.
Yeah,
Right, so
we see the presenter.
Let me swap my settings. There you go. Now do you see one?
Perfect. Perfect.
All right. Very good. So thank you all very much for coming tonight. I'm so delighted that you're here. You may hear me say teen dating violence tonight. You may hear me say domestic violence. You may hear me say intimate partner violence, excuse me, or relationship violence. Really, we're all talking about the same things. We're talking tonight about unhealthy relationships, and we're talking about what we can do about it and how we can learn about it. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to talk about a quick housekeeping matter, and that is that, you know, this conversation tonight can sometimes be hard, and so it can sometimes be triggering for people. So if you need to take a moment and take a break or go, you know, exercise some self-care by taking a walk or something, please feel free to do so. You won't hurt my feelings, and I won't be offended if you shut down your camera and you need to walk away. All right. So what I like to do is, first, I want to acknowledge my attendees tonight. To me, you are superheroes. One, as I mentioned before we started recording, I can't stand the sight of blood. So everybody in the medical profession is a hero for me. But you medical professionals, really, you wrap so many things into one profession. You not only do all of your medical work, you know, interviewing, providing care in a trauma-informed manner, but often you're also a counselor. And for those of you who are in forensics, sometimes you also act as a law enforcement officer, investigating and documenting evidence. And then you have to explain that medical and that science information to a bunch of dumb lawyers like myself. And then you have to teach professionally about that in court, and sometimes teach a room full of jurors. So you're this like superhero with all these different professions wrapped into one. And you know, I couldn't do what you do on my very best day. So my hat is off to you, and you work every day to save teenagers' lives, to save people's lives who are in abusive relationships. And so before we recorded, I got a sense of where people are working and what people are doing. So thank you for that. That will help me as we talk tonight. So I just want to share a story with all of you about why I think this conversation about healthy relationships, teen dating violence is really important. So for years, I covered what is called DV court, domestic violence court. It's a criminal court. It's where adults convicted of DV are required to attend a year-long counseling class, 2 hours every week. It's a big deal. And at the end of that year, they'll come back into court and they'll tell the judge that they're finished with their class. And the judge will often say, well, what did you learn in your class? And I can't tell you the number of times a person convicted of domestic violence would say, I wish I'd learned this in grade school. This should have been a required class in school. And so why do I share this story tonight? Well, I think that it helps us all understand that by learning about domestic violence, especially teen dating violence, we can help it stop before it even begins. And so during those teen years, we have to remember that young people are learning those skills. And this is when they're learning how to form relationships with one another. And so we want those experiences to be positive. And so it's an ideal time to learn about what's healthy, to learn about patterns of behavior and what's healthy and what's not healthy. And remember, all of these patterns that are occurring are going to probably last through adulthood. And so that's why we're here tonight. So I want to accomplish two things tonight. I want to build awareness. I want to help you understand what is teen dating violence, what does it look like, what is it rooted in, And then 2, I want to talk about prevention and what can we do to help stop teen dating violence. So before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about a game. And this is where I need everybody to participate because you don't want to just listen to me for the next while. So we're going to play a game. So before we start, I want to make a comment about teen dating violence. And I want to recognize that although teen relationships are similar to adult relationships, teenagers face some unique obstacles that adults may not face. So for example, some teens just simply don't trust adults, right? So in order to get help, they're going to have to overcome that distrust. Some don't even understand what a violent relationship is or what abuse is. And so they don't have the knowledge base to recognize the situation they're in. Some teenagers don't have the financial resources to get assistance. Maybe they don't have cars to get where they need to go and they don't have the transportation to get assistance. And then some teenagers have a fear of lack of confidentiality, right? A lot of people out there who teenagers might talk to are mandated reporters, or there are parental consent laws, and they don't want their parents to know what's going on. And so while all of these obstacles are there, at the same time, teenagers have a lot of peer pressure to be in intimate relationships. And so you have this tug of war for teenagers about what happens when they're starting to develop these intimate relationships where there's a lack of education about it. They don't have the information and they don't recognize what's happening to them and they have nowhere to go. So it's kind of like the perfect storm. So these obstacles can really raise barriers and prevent teenagers from getting the help they need. And so our goal tonight is to really talk about and remove these barriers. So let's first start with our game. All right, so I need you just to kind of yell out because with my PowerPoint, I can't see you. All right. So when you think about domestic violence, what are 5 categories of teen dating violence that you think about? So when you hear the words dating violence or abuse, what do you picture in your mind? And just shout it out.
Sexual assault.
Sexual assault. What else?
Emotional abuse.
Emotional abuse. Thank you. What else?
Physical abuse.
Verbal abuse.
Physical, stalking, verbal.
Intimidation.
To the last one? Intimidation. Thank you. Excellent. Very good. So you all mentioned what many of us think of violence. We think about the first one was sexual assault, right? Any sexual activity that's occurring without consent, kissing, intercourse, tampering with contraceptives. It can also equate to someone spreading rumors about a partner if they refuse to have sex. The next one that someone yelled out was emotional or psychological abuse. Threats, name calling, spreading rumors, isolation from family or friends, right? Intimidation, shaming, all of those behaviors that really harm. I'm going to use the word victim tonight just for ease of terminology. I know that a lot of people use survivor or overcomer or thriver, but I'm just going to use the word victim tonight, and forgive me if that's not terminology that's acceptable to you. But these emotional and psychological behaviors really harm the victim's sense of self-worth, and that constant monitoring of them can really cut down their self-esteem. The next one that was yelled out was the physical, right? That's what's pictured here on the slide and what a lot of us think about when we think about violence, that hitting, that punching, that slapping. It's an intentional use of physical touch to cause fear or assert control over one's partner. The other one we talked about was stalking. Absolutely. Again, that constant monitoring, always knowing where your partner is, always having to know what your partner is doing and who they're with. And then the last one that was talked about was the intimidation, right? Going back again to that sort of emotional and psychological abuse. And the one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about tonight is the one that we missed, and the really big one today, and it's digital abuse, right? And we're going to take a deeper dive into this shortly, so I'll just kind of gloss over it right now. But what I want you all to think about is that we don't need all of these types of violence for there to be a violent relationship, right? What if we only had verbal abuse, or what if we only had physical abuse? Often I will tell you that when there is one of these behaviors involved, many of the others are also involved at the same time. But none of them are required to be there for the relationship to be abusive. They can be mixed or matched, unfortunately. But the physical abuse in any one of these is really a definite warning sign, right? That something is going on in this relationship that's not healthy. And we're going to talk about what you can do when you start to see these behaviors. So very good. So now that we've just talked about different types of violence, let's take a moment to define teen dating violence. And we have Liz Clark here with us tonight, and she is the co-chair of the Teen Dating Violence Committee. And this definition comes from that committee. So teen dating violence is a pattern of violent, coercive, or manipulative behaviors to gain power and maintain control over another person in a relationship, right? So all of those behaviors that we just talked about, physical, emotional abuse, stalking, intimidation, all of those behaviors are part of the definition of teen dating violence. At the center of all of those different behaviors is power and control. It's when one person deliberately uses abusive and manipulative tactics to gain that power and control over a current partner or a former partner, right? It's when one person in the relationship is always making the decisions, calling the shots, deciding what they're going to do, where they're going to go, who they're going to see, which movie they're going to watch, right? And the victim in the relationship or the other person in the relationship really lacks autonomy or independence, and they don't get to make any of the relationships or their own decisions. And, you know, for example, what does this look like? It may look like the victim in the relationship can't text their mom because the controlling partner is always monitoring their phone or looking over their shoulder. Or maybe they can't freely text their friends because their abuser is there, you know, again, looking over their shoulder or listening to those phone calls, or they have the password to their victim's phone so they can see everything that's happening. But at the root of all of these behaviors is that power and control, where one person is exercising that power and control over the other person in the relationship. And so now I just want to take a moment to pause and acknowledge that term relationship, because we as adults use that word perhaps in a way that teenagers don't necessarily use it. So oftentimes for us adults, when we hear that term relationship, we think of someone who is married currently or formerly, maybe somebody who is dating, maybe an ex dating, maybe a friend with benefits, maybe someone that you had a one-night stand with, someone that you met and matched up with on a dating app, right? But this isn't necessarily the way that teenagers always define that term relationship. We might say, hey, my son is dating that person, and my son will turn around and look at me and like, whoa, mom, we're just hanging out, or we're just talking, or we're just friends, right? Or on the other end of the spectrum, an adult may be very dismissive of that relationship and say, oh, it's just puppy love, when the teenager takes that relationship very seriously. And so we as adults, I think, have to be understanding and open-minded about that term relationship and not put our label on what a relationship, on what a teenager is experiencing. And so we just have to understand that this definition can be different, but no matter how we define it, if we see these behaviors, then we should be stepping in and doing something about that. And we're going to talk about what we can do in the latter half of this presentation. All right, so our next question in our game, how many high school students have been or will be in an abusive relationship? 1 in 25, 10, or 3? And you can just shout it out.
3.
3.
Excellent. You guys are super smart. So yes, 1 in 3. And I really think if you look around this screen right now at the number of us on here, you know, you look your left, you look to your right, that's one of you statistically is in an abusive relationship. And when you break that down into students, that's 1.5 million high school students a year. And that's alarming. You know, I think a lot of people think that teen dating violence doesn't happen. We think of it as an adult problem. It's hard to picture youths engaged in teen dating violence. But in fact, based on this statistic, it is very common, unfortunately. All right, so next question. What is correct? Which is correct? Nearly 1 in 4, 10, or 12 teenagers have been victimized through technology. And again, you can just shout it out.
1 in 4.
4.
4.
Excellent. I have a super smart crowd here with me. Yes. And that statistic, ladies and gentlemen, is pre-COVID. So think about it now where technology has really started to dominate our teenagers' lives. You know, it's how they communicate, it's how they get together, it's how they meet, it's how they date. So this statistic, my guess, is much higher now, but this was the statistic that I had from the Zweig study. All right, very good. So far you have an A+. All right, what percentage of teenage girls who are abused remain in the relationship? 50, 80, or 62%?
62.
80.
80 and 62%. those are the answers. Good. So 80% of teenage girls who are abused remain in the relationship. And this is a very misunderstood statistic, right? Everybody always wants to know, why do people stay in abusive relationships? Why don't they just end it or leave? And we have to really get in that mindset of, why do people stay? And there's a lot of reasons. Again, think about those obstacles I mentioned just a few minutes ago about teenagers. Some of them don't recognize that they're in an abusive relationship, so they don't even know what to do. Some teenagers may feel helpless or maybe hopeless. Maybe they feel ashamed of the relationship that they're in. Maybe they blame themselves. Maybe they just feel stuck. Maybe they don't know what to do or how to get help. They feel very traumatized, or they feel like nobody can help them. Maybe they fear for their family or their pets, right? Oftentimes an abuser may be threatening to hurt their pet or their family if their partner doesn't do what they say. And then unfortunately, sometimes victims feel like they deserve the abuse, that it's what they know. Maybe they're growing up in a home like that. And remember, it takes an average of about 7 times for a victim to leave a domestic violence relationship before doing so for good. So this statistic, unfortunately, is not surprising. Okay, the most severe injuries, including death, are most likely to occur when A, the victim is trying to leave or has recently left the relationship, B, has posted a selfie with another person, or C, the couple is arguing after drinking alcohol.
A.
Getting ready to.
Yeah, excellent. A. So remember, a relationship, when we start using that term, and we use it loosely, can be a current or a former relationship. And so we always have to remember that when a victim is trying to leave a relationship, that is the most dangerous time for them. And so that is when we should always be supporting that teenager, providing them with a safety plan, supporting them with family, with school, with community, with resources like some of us on this call tonight can provide. Okay, so ages 16 to 24 are the most vulnerable group to teen dating violence. And this behavior, unfortunately, typically begins between ages 12 and 18. Think about it. When you were 12, how much did you know about teen dating at all? Never mind violence, right? So again, these relationships that start in the teen years start early and can last a lifetime. So we really need to think about when these teenagers are exhibiting behaviors like teasing or name calling. They may start to think of it as normal behavior because everybody else around them is doing it. Maybe everybody, you know, boyfriends and girlfriends and people who are dating are kissing each other without asking for consent. And so this is all normal behavior to them. So we have to really remind our teenagers that these behaviors that appear to be unhealthy can become abusive and develop into more serious forms of violence and continue into adulthood. So I'm going to go very quickly through the next couple of slides because all of the statistics that I've talked about so far have been national statistics, but I don't want anyone to think that this isn't a problem here in San Diego. This is from a teen dating violence study that the San Diego Domestic Violence Council did, where they evaluated and assessed 1,700 San Diego youth between the ages of 11 and 18. And you can see here from these quotations the information that teens believe is okay when it comes to teen dating violence, when it's okay to resort to violence. And so when you look and read through this study, the message it sends to me is that violence is accepted, it's being justified, it's being normalized, which can result in higher perpetration. And so we need to become educated. We need to become aware, not only as adults, but we need to be teaching our kids so that we can set these kids up for success in their future relationships. So I'm going to talk briefly about digital abuse, and I'm talking about digital abuse because during COVID, it's been the predominant means of communication for teenagers while we've all been, homebound. And so technology, as I mentioned before, is also the center of teenagers' lives. It's the primary way that they're communicating. And I'm going to tell you a story. This morning I was carpooling, bringing some kids to school, and they made a comment that between 7 o'clock last night and 6 o'clock this morning, they had received on this group chat 268 texts. I'm like, aren't you guys supposed to be sleeping? So that's a real life example. And these kids are 14. Of the extent that our youth is texting. In 2010, teenagers between 12 and 17 were sending about 100 texts a day. I mean, that's staggering, and that was 11 years ago. So imagine what they're doing today. We can't even capture that statistic realistically because there's so many different platforms to message So digital abuse is here, and it is a form of domestic violence because, again, it's like those other forms of abuse. It's rooted in power and control. It's where one person has the power in the relationship. The other person doesn't get to make the call or the shots. And so what does that look like? So for digital abuse, it looks like tampering with a partner's social media account. That's the most prevalent form of digital abuse today. More than 1 in 12 say that their partner has used their social media account without their permission. Imagine if someone used your social media account without your permission, how violated you would feel. And then, of course, we have acts of sexual digital abuse, which are the second and third most reported complaints as well. 51% of girls and 18% of boys say that pressure from their partner was why they sent a sexy picture or a sexy photo. And as we know, that as soon as you send out that photograph, it's gone, and it can land anywhere. So digital abuse is on the rise. The LGBTQI plus community, of course, unfortunately, as in all other forms of abuse, are being hit at higher rates. And so these are a particular group of youth that we always have to have our eye on. So this slide I like because it really just shows you what I mentioned before, that when you have one form of abuse in a relationship, there is most likely other forms of abuse going on as well. So when you see digital abuse, it is a red flag that teens are probably experiencing other types of abuse. So pay attention and don't ignore these signs. We're going to talk about those in just a minute. So very quickly, looking at the time, what does cyber abuse look like? So it looks like cyber spying, where one partner is demanding access to another person's phone or social media account. It's where one partner is consistently reading the other person's private messages, right? Doing so without the victim's consent. It is where they use social media to spy on the other partner. And we're going to talk about stalking in just a moment. Or it's where they are exercising control over their partner and saying who they can and they cannot be friends with, who they can and they cannot like. So it's really exercising that control through a digital means. Digital abuse can also look like harassment or constant messaging, right? Where that abusive partner may be asking you a ton of questions, not out of care or concern, but out of control. Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing later? How late are you staying out, right? This isn't about love or about care. This is about control. Again, exhibiting that unhealthy dynamic in the relationship about who gets to make the shots, who gets that feeling of entitlement. I get to know where my partner is all the time and who they're with. You know, those relentless questions are more of an interrogation, and often they're accusatory and they're jealous, right? I saw you looking at him. Don't deny it, right? Shifting that blame onto the victim to feel like they're doing something wrong when really it's that abusive partner's jealousy, and it's being used in a repeated and accusatory way. So what happens when you have this type of behavior is that the victim in the relationship feels like they can never leave their phone, right? They always have to have it by their side. They always have to be ready to answer that text or that call, because if they don't, they're going to get in trouble with the other partner, right? Hey, why didn't you call me back when I called you? Or hey, what are you doing? You didn't text me back when I texted you. And again, this is that 24/7 constant monitoring and access to one's partner. And so the victimized partner really starts to lose their boundaries, and they have to have their phone with them all the time, and they don't want to make their partner angry. And so this has such a negative impact on the well-being of the victim, and it limits their time with their friends and with their family. And so that isolation starts to really kick in, monopolizing the victim, removing them from their support system. And so this is very negative behavior. So another way that cyber abuse can display itself is through cruelty, bullying, intimidation. You know, when you are on that text string or social media account, really demeaning or humiliating or embarrassing one's partner. And this is especially common after a breakup, right? Using this tool to really embarrass, to really, again, isolate their partner and prohibit them from reaching out and getting support. So coming back to stalking, like I just referenced. So stalking is when someone repeatedly is watching or following or harassing their partner, making them feel unsafe or afraid. And so when I teach to youth, I always ask this question, and it just blows my mind. And I will ask, how many ways can your partner keep track of your location digitally? And so the youth will just start yelling out all of these responses, you know, social media pages, blogs, Snapchat, Find My Friends, on Facebook, on Yelp check-ins, on photos, on tagged photos. I mean, they just start yelling from all directions of the room. But these are all means by which the controlling partner can demand that their partner share the location to prove that they are where they say they are, or just to check in to see where they are. And then oftentimes what will happen is this will be used so that the victimized partner has to justify their behavior, where they are, what they're doing. Maybe there's accusations of cheating because they're with another person. And so, you know, again, this is a very manipulative behavior. It's a sneaky way to keep track of their partner. One's partner may say, well, I'm just looking out for your best interest, or, you know, I don't want you to be with that person because they don't take care of you. They won't take care of you like I do. When really it's just about keeping that control over one's partner. And then the last way that I'm going to talk about today for digital abuse is that sexting and that sexual coercion, right? That forcing the other person to send unwanted sexual messages or photos without consent. Maybe they're pressuring the person to take a video and send it to someone else if they don't want to. And then, of course, we have a big form of digital abuse is trafficking, right? And I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. When one person is being forced to engage in sex acts for money or some other item of value. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is that most teenagers believe that I would never get stuck in that situation. This could never happen to me, that I would never be engaged in that level of deceit. My partner would never do that to me. But unfortunately, it is very real. It is in the high schools. It is in the schools here. And it does happen. And it's happening a lot online. So please pay attention to, if you're a parent, your children's phones and social media accounts, particularly now during COVID when these teenagers are really isolated and using digital technology to communicate. So again, digital abuse is all about power and control. That's what it's rooted in. It's not rooted in love. It's not rooted in care. It's that one partner using digital means to dominate and gain control over their partner. It's about coercion, pressuring, harassing their partner to do things or to say things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And all of these behaviors are not only embarrassing, but they're very belittling, and they really devalue the harmed partner's sense of self-worth. So this is this next slide I'm going to share with you is again a great slide by urban.org, where they share how teens just start to accept, you know, these small behaviors in a relationship, and every day those behaviors start to get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and more serious. And then what started off as maybe something really small, where they thought their partner was just showing them love, what the teen doesn't realize is that it's really a possessiveness, it's a jealousy, it's excessive. And then it starts to build, and then suddenly they find themselves in this relationship that is being dominated by power and control. So that's my awareness piece. And I hope I've given you a little bit of information about what teen dating violence looks like and how prevalent it is and how it builds and how it exhibits itself, especially in a digital format. But now I want to shift gears and talk about what can you do about this, right? How can we stop this behavior? You know, when we see teen dating violence, where can we step in and how can we do it? Well, I want to give all of you a big round of applause and say you're already doing one thing just by being here, increasing your awareness, taking time out of your evening to educate yourself about teen dating violence. And you all here as medical professionals really have a unique opportunity to help stop teen dating violence. You know, at some point, most teenagers are seen by a healthcare provider, and these settings are critical. They're critical opportunities for early identification and early prevention of teen dating violence. In fact, many of the calls that law enforcement gets about domestic violence come from nurses and doctors who are in hospitals where people are walking in with injuries and bruises that are from an abusive relationship. So let's talk about what you can do. So first of all, you can learn the warning signs, right? It's critical that everybody recognize the warning signs of teen dating violence. And we need to watch out for each other, right? We need to watch out for changes in our friends' behaviors, in our youth's patterns. We need to watch out for those red flags. So this slide lists a bunch of those warning signs that suggest that an intimate relationship may be abusive or may be becoming abusive, right? When you see that hurtful or insulting communication, like constant put downs by one person to the other, maybe you see that physical mistreatment, maybe you see that verbal mistreatment that we talked about at the very beginning, right? Making fun of their partner in front of friends or online. Maybe it's when one is accusing the other of flirting or cheating when both parties know it's not true. Maybe the abuser denies the abusive actions and then they try to shift that blame to the victim for the harm that they're actually doing and causing. Again, where we have control, where there's no equality in that relationship. And again, a big warning sign is when we see that isolation, right? Suddenly one partner is controlling where the other partner goes, who they see, what they do. Suddenly, you can't go on to your friend's social media account, you've been blocked, or when you call, they never pick up, right? That isolation is a really big warning sign. And then of course, anytime you see any type of forced sexual activity, when maybe one teen is forcing the other to have sex, that's a huge warning sign as well. So more warning signs of teen dating violence for us to watch out for are, again, any of those physical marks, bruising, and it doesn't make sense. I hit the chair, I hit the desk, right? That bruise or that mark doesn't match the explanation. When you see changes in behavior, right, whether it be mood swings or you see one partner stop spending time with family or friends, or maybe they've stopped playing sports, or they're not playing their musical instruments anymore. Maybe they have deleted accounts altogether. Maybe it was their abuser who deleted those accounts, right? So all of these are warning signs for digital abuse. Or for teen dating violence. And when we talk about digital abuse, here again are some of those warning signs, right? All of a sudden, maybe your friend is getting these excessive texts and calls that they have to respond to all the time. Maybe if you take a look at those messages, they're very demeaning or they're very threatening. And one of the things that we have to really think about when we talk about digital abuse is we have to remember that this stuff is all happening behind the screens, right? It's not like a punch out in public where you see it physically happening. This stuff on the phones and on social media, it's not out in the open. So we have to kind of look for it if we are concerned about a friend or a child or someone that we know. And so it takes a little bit of extra effort. I do want to just touch on very briefly that teen dating violence. Suicide is always a potential consequence of it. And, when a teenager is making statements of hopelessness or helplessness, like it doesn't matter what I do, or, maybe they seem to have a preoccupation with death. We really need to push those teens to talk a little bit more about what they're feeling and what's going on. And so this is really why it's important for those of you in the medical profession to really learn these warning signs. And now I want to share what I think is a really staggering statistic about why it's important for you to also learn those warning signs. And it is because teens are not talking and our parents don't know. So 67% of teenagers are not talking about dating violence. So think about that. 67% of teens aren't talking about it. So they're in a bad relationship. They're potentially in an abusive relationship and they're not telling anybody about it, right? And again, this goes back to those things we talked about at the beginning. Why not? Well, maybe they're afraid. Maybe they blame themselves. Maybe they feel guilty. Maybe they don't recognize it's an abusive relationship, right? And then on the flip side of this, parents are overconfident in what they think they know, right? So this is a perfect storm where teenagers aren't talking, parents don't know, and so there's this big gap. And so you as medical professionals can really step into that gap and help fill it and start those conversations with teenagers where their parents maybe aren't in the room, right? Most medical institutions allow teenagers between 12 or 13 to consent to private medical exams where their parents aren't there, and maybe those teenagers will be more willing to talk to you when their parents aren't in the room. So another way that you can prevent teen dating violence is to think about who are the teens at risk. And you will see that I have nothing listed on this slide because we can talk about who those teens are. Maybe they're teens who are in families who are experiencing domestic violence, or maybe they're teenagers who are using alcohol or drugs, or who are in the criminal justice system or foster care. Or we can identify all of these teens who potentially might be at risk. But what I want to pose to you is that you take a broader lens to this. And I want you just to assume that every teenager is at risk for teen dating violence. Because if you approach it in this way, then you're less likely to miss anyone who might be in an unhealthy relationship. Think about those warning signs and apply it to every teenager that you're interacting with. And that way no one will slip through the cracks, I hope. Now, as medical professionals, many of you are mandated reporters, right? So if you see a warning sign or you hear something that doesn't feel quite right or causes you concern, maybe you've identified a teenager at risk. And so now what do you do, right? I think it's very important for medical professionals to be very upfront about their mandated reporting status. And I know that Amy and Anna have done some training on this. I have just put some links here on this slide. I would actually guide you to Anna and Amy if you have any questions, but these are also wonderful resources. And I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with Amy and Anna if they want to share it with you. The first link up there, mandatedreporterca.com, is from a CWS caseworker. And her position is, if you see something that causes you concern, report it. So I'll let Anna and Amy guide you on those mandated reporting requirements, but here's a couple of links for information for you. All right, so another way that all of you here tonight can help prevent teen dating violence is utilizing a resource that Center for Community Solutions put together. This was a great resource. It's called Start the Conversation. It's a little guide. Center for Community Solutions hands them out all the time. But it's about having those conversations that are hard, right? And so on this slide are some conversation starters. Really, you just want to start opening up the conversation. You want to have very open-ended questions. And when they start to talk, you want to listen and you want to be quiet. Adults have a real problem sometimes just being quiet. We want to, give our advice and we're so smart, we know everything. We just want to listen and we want to validate their experiences and we want to focus on ways to empower those teenagers, like supporting them in how they can move forward, where they can go to get help, who they might be able to talk to, maybe a warm handoff to a counselor. But this slide just has some conversation starters and things that maybe you can talk to your patients about if you suspect that they may be in some type of abusive or unhealthy relationship. And then, of course, one of the most important prevention factors is a support network. Having a strong network of supportive people where there's trust and respect, where people are checking in on each other, listening without judgment, and stepping in when necessary. Maybe those are friendships, maybe they're sporting or religious groups or music groups, anywhere where that teen feels loved and validated and accepted. And a lot of people don't remember, but we really have to be looking at both sides of the equation here. We can't just focus on the victim of the abuse. We also have to focus on the person who's doing the harm. Because if we don't address the person doing the harm, then they're just going to move to the next person. And that pattern is going to repeat and repeat and repeat. So we have to remember that we have to talk to both sides on this. And when and if you come across a patient in your office and they are suggesting that perhaps they're abusing or hurting someone in a relationship, be supportive to them too. Listen to them, acknowledge their feelings. Let them know that, violence is not okay. And there are other ways to get help to address this issue. And I'm going to show you a really neat slide from a presentation that we did for school nurses back in 2019. Just a real quick visual about really listening and validating and showing empathy to teenagers, whether they're being victimized or whether they are the person doing the harm, so that we can stop this relationship violence and get them the assistance that they need. And again, going back to that idea that we have to be respectful of teenagers, and a lot of times we want to tell teenagers, just end that relationship, just walk away. But I want to remind everybody that, again, when you leave a relationship, that is the most dangerous time, right? That's when the retaliatory behavior starts to happen. That's when maybe those sexual pictures start to get sent out across the community. But we can be supportive and we can provide resources and we can help teenagers. But at the end of the day, they have to make the decision, right? And so we can continue to be there for them. We can continue to say, if you need help, I'm here, I'll listen to you. And we can try to help remove those barriers so that they make the decision that I'm going to end this relationship and I'm going to start on a journey of healing. One of the things that I would beg and ask all of you is, please, if you see something, do not ignore it. Do not ignore it. Be that person's voice that is being harmed. Stand up for that person. Act on your gut feelings that something doesn't feel right or something looks wrong here. Step in. Because if you don't do anything, your silence is telling the abuser, is telling the victim that this behavior is okay. And it's not okay. So we need to be upstanders, and we need to be reaching out, supporting these teenagers who are in these unhealthy relationships. And we also need to be teaching about teen dating violence. We need to have policies around teen dating violence. So my call to action to those of you here in the health profession, do you have a policy in your office about how you're going to respond to teen dating violence? Does your institution understand what teen dating violence is? If not, take those steps so that your agency can be full of upstanders as opposed to bystanders. So again, you'll get this PowerPoint, but here's some resources for you where you can get more information about what teen dating violence looks like and what you can do about it. And then I'm going to just go through these very quickly, these slides, and just tell you a little bit about my organization, which is one of the resources. It's called Your Safe Place. It's free, it's confidential, it's a safe place where we provide services to adult, elder, youth, teenagers, anyone who is victimized by domestic violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault. We also do elder abuse, but that's not really for this particular crowd, and intra-family abuse. So a client's safety is our first and foremost priority. And so we offer all kinds of services as people come in. But again, that safety planning is first and foremost. We have a kids club if anybody comes in with children, and we'll separate those children so that the client can get services. We have all kinds of counseling, boys and men's counseling, Spanish speaking counseling. We have this teenager group for youth. We have, again, this Spanish group counseling. These are some of our counseling rooms here at Your Safe Place. If you ever want to come and check them out, we give tours on Fridays. We have lots of legal assistance available with domestic violence restraining orders, immigration assistance, etc. If you have a domestic violence hearing and you don't want to go there because you don't want to sit across the room from your abuser or your trafficker, you can remote into the courtroom through one of these offices here. We have very specific assistance for sex trafficked clients. We have a wonderful relationship with Anna Ginther's agency, Palomar, where they provide services for forensic medical exams. And I will tell you, all of you here who are nurses are wonderful. I can tell you that the Palomar forensic nurses who are specifically trained to do these medical exams are some of the nicest, most thoughtful, caring, and loving people I've ever met. So we're very fortunate to have their partnership. We also have a case management team for those who are at really high risk of being murdered. We have law enforcement. If anyone is ever asking for that, we will make that connection. We have a gun violence restraining order unit who will help us remove guns through a gun violence restraining order. If someone mentions that there's a gun or a threat of a gun, we have a confidential military advocate. And then we have this awesome program with Shariah's Closet who will provide professional clothing, maybe someone who's going to court, maybe someone who is going for a job interview. On the other end of the spectrum, we have these essential needs for anyone fleeing, going to a shelter. And then we have all kinds of other services from transportation to CalFresh to housing needs to pet relocation, trying to also look at our clients not being defined by their trafficking or their abuse, but looking at them as a whole person and providing some assistance in that whole well-being as well. We also have lots of calls and we help lots of people from the community with their clients. So if you ever need help, please feel free to call us. Send your clients to our physical location. We offer assistance in person, over the phone, remotely, just like this. But we are here to support teenagers. Like I said, we have tours and we really appreciate anyone coming in and helping those teenagers. This is my contact information. Oh, no, it's not. Here, and I'm going to try to stop sharing here. So there you have it, fast and furious. Does anyone have any questions?
That was fantastic, Diane. I actually had a quick question since we're talking about teenagers. At Your Safe Place, what is the minimum age in which a teenager can consent for their own services like counseling and all that? Or are there certain age groups where they need a parent permission?
That's a really good question. So generally between the ages of around 12 or 13, we will allow a client to consent to one-on-one, say, individual counseling. Now, if you're younger than that, we do require client consent. I will tell you, though, that despite that kind of age, there are occasions where a youth or a teenager will come in and they will want that individual counseling, and the counselor will assess that perhaps that individual counseling without parental consent is not in the best case, or is not the best case for that particular client. And so they will talk to the client about bringing in their parents and getting their consent to do that, because not every youth can handle these challenges on their own. And so every case is a little bit individual, Anna, but that's a really good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
I have a question. You mentioned, that we need to make sure that the perpetrators get support and assistance in creating healthier patterns. What resources do you have for those?
So, in San Diego, it's a bit of a challenge. I will be very honest, Amy. We have, at the very beginning, I talked about when I covered DV court, and the defendants were required to go to that DVRP class. And I think that's a really good resource. There are agencies out there. Michelle Coonan, I know, teaches a specific course for teenagers. And what that class does is it teaches things like red flags, or what should you be looking for in your own behaviors, that you start to identify what you're doing that may be unhealthy or maybe contributing to an unhealthy relationship. And so it starts to build that sort of self-awareness. Maybe that youth that is doing the harm has their own issues that they need to address. And so I do know that Michelle Coonan has a program for teenagers, and I believe that she works with both sides. But the DVRP courses, Domestic Violence Recovery Program, I would contact the providers, the counselors who offer those, and ask, is this an appropriate program for a teenager? Because there's probably classes that are not geared for teenagers and some that are. But I do know that on the San Diego probation website, they have a list of all the DVRP providers.
I know, is the STEPS program the one that you're referring to? Or,
I'm not familiar with that program, Amy. I'm sorry.
well, it's okay. I'm a foster youth mentor, so some of the kids that I've worked with have done that, where they've grown up in a domestic violence situation and they've learned patterns that are unhealthy, and it helps them to learn what are appropriate boundaries, consent, and all of the things that they need.
Right. And, if they've never been taught that, and if what they have observed in their home is, an abusive relationship, one where there are no boundaries, it can be a challenge for them to not copycat that behavior in their own relationships because they don't know any different. So that awareness and that prevention on both sides of an abusive relationship is very important.
I have a question regarding gender. I know that I'm guilty of assuming that the perpetrator would be a male. How common is it that the female is a perpetrator?
So I don't have any hard numbers for you, Adrian, but I will tell you anecdotally, from covering court for many, many years, that I have witnessed an increase in female criminal defendants. So women who are being charged, and this is adult court, not teenagers, women who are being charged with domestic violence crimes. So anecdotally, I would say that I think women are being held accountable more often, or maybe it's on the rise. I can't answer that question. But yes, I think a lot of people make that assumption, but there are a lot of women out there who are the harm doers. And in fact, here at Your Safe Place, that's one of the things that we've really tried to acknowledge. And so we recently started a men's support group. Luis Canseco, who's the other co-chair for the Teen Dating Violence Committee, is running that. And it's a safe place for men and boys who are over 17 to come and, remove that stigma of being a victim and come and talk about their experiences and feel safe about doing that. And it's been a really great program. I'm really proud of Luis for running that.
Just real quick, at Your Safe Place, does the perpetrator have access to
No.
those two resources?
No, we are statutorily prohibited actually from providing abusers with services here. So the other problem that it often creates is a conflict. So we may have already helped the person who was being harmed, and so we can't help both sides.
Okay, so the victim does have access to counseling and resources.
Yes,
Okay,
we have
perfect.
counseling here. We're downtown, 1122 Broadway. We're pretty easily accessible. Buses, the trolley line's right behind us. But yes, we have counseling here. And as long as you come in and you're someone who has unfortunately been harmed by domestic violence or teen dating violence, we can certainly work to set up a safety plan for you, right? That's always the first thing we want to do. And then get you those services that you need, which include counseling.
Okay.
And then the North County location, I know it's not open yet, but when is it going to be open?
My understanding, Amy, from the last time I spoke with Tracy Fryer, is that it is slated currently to open in San Marcos, for those of you who don't know, on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Claudia Grasso will be the executive director of, I think it's One Safe Place. We have very similar names. And their services will be very similar. Palomar is a partner up there as well. So San Diego is very fortunate. It has the flagship Family Justice Center and now another second wonderful organization that will be opening in just a few months up in San Marcos.
Okay, thanks. I have another question. We're hearing a lot from survivors in our area about strangulation with human trafficking survivors. And it's also something that we see more in popular media, that they're portraying this on the screen. And I'm just curious, like, how do you, especially with young people, how do you teach them how unsafe that is? And
well, strangulation is a huge lethality factor for homicide, as you know, and being a former prosecutor, I have a bail argument about strangulation that I can rattle off. But it's really, again, about education. And, what's interesting is we have been seeing here is strangulation of other family members, which is something new I've never seen before. So not only is a victim being strangled, but perhaps the victim's mother or the victim's roommate. And that's been something new for me. But again, I think that youth really need to understand that when strangulation is happening, it is a huge factor for homicide. And as you mentioned, Amy, it's unfortunate that our media portrays it very lightly and does not do it any justice as to how dangerous it is.
And we're going to, Anna and I had a meeting. She connected us with the Strangulation Institute, and we're going to be having a training on that in February.
That's fantastic. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, so don't forget that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for your time tonight and your commitment to helping build your awareness and prevent teen dating violence. I think every single one of us can play a part, especially you medical professionals. You have such unique access to teenagers, and you have, I think, a means by which to reach teenagers that perhaps us other adults don't, right? They don't want to talk to mom and they don't want to talk to their friend's mom. So I think that you have a really unique opportunity to help prevent this type of violence. So thank you for all that you do every day. I could never do your job because I'm afraid of blood. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
So
great
good.
job, Diane. It was a pleasure to finally see you present. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
I'm just going to, there we go.